Dear friends, English literature, Introduction to Poetry, Ode to the West Wind by Percy B. Shelley. Brief questions with answers. Stanza 1. Question 1. Why does the poet address the west wind as the breath of autumn spring? Answer. The poet addresses the west wind as such because he imagined the autumn as a person and the west wind as his breath, since it is composed of wind as a person's breath. Question 2. Why do the dead leaves look like a pestilence striking multitudes? Answer. When many people die from an epidemic disease, their bodies are of different shapes, sizes, and colors. The dead leaves of the autumnal trees look as buried as they. Question 3. In which way are the dead leaves like ghosts? Answer. The ghosts flee from an the ghosts flee from an enchanter. The dead leaves are driven by the west wind. In the sense of being driven, they look like the ghosts. Question 4. How does the west wind function like a chariot to the dead leaves? Answer. In olden times, fighters used chariots in battles. Their defeated enemies fell dead before their chariot and went under the earth. The west wind functions like a chariot to the seeds of autumnal trees. Question 5. Why is the spring called the azure sister of the west wind? Answer. That the sky remains usually free of clouds in the spring in cold countries and looks clear blue, that is azure. So she is regarded as an azure sister. Question 6. What happens as a result of the clarion call of the spring? Answer. As a result of the clarion call of the spring, the seeds sprout inside the earth, trees grow and fill the earth with living colors and fragrance of the leaves and buds. Question 7. How is the west wind a destroyer and a preserver? Answer. The west wind is a destroyer in that it destroys the leaves of autumnal trees, and a preserver in that it preserves the seeds of trees in the earth during the winter. Question 8. What do you understand by the deep sky's commotion? Answer. The west wind creates a great chaos and confusion at a high level in the atmosphere as it produces clouds and storms. Question 9. In which way are the clouds like dead leaves of autumn? Answer. The leaves of trees in autumn decay and are shed off. The clouds are conceived of as leaves which are shed from the tangled boughs of the ocean and the sky. Question 10. Why are the clouds called the angels of rain and lightning? Answer. The angels of God carry out the order of God. The clouds carry out the order of the west wind. They produce rain, thunder, and hail, so they are angels of the west wind. Question 11. Why are the clouds sprayed from the horizon to the zenith like the hair of some fierce maenad? Answer. The maenads are intoxicated and frenzied female followers of Bacchus, the wine of God, the god of wine, with their disheveled hair and fierce look. The clouds also seem fierce with the imminent phenomena of rain, thunder, and hailstorm as they spread in the sky before the storm starts. Question 12. Why is the west wind regarded as the dirge of the dying year? Answer. The poet conceives of the west wind as the sound of a song of grief for the year which is at the end. Question 13. What will be the doom of the sepulchre for the dying year? Answer. This closing night, the last night of the dying year, will be the doom of the sepulchre, the tomb for the dying year. Question 14. What will be the doom of the sepulchre for the dying year like? Answer. The doom of the sepulchre of the dying year will be vaulted with the congregated mighty peppers, strong clouds, from which black rain and lightning and hail will burst. Stanza 3. Question 15. Whom did the west wind waken from his summer dreams? Answer. The west wind wakened the Mediterranean Sea from his summer dreams. The sea has been imagined as a person. Question 16. How and where was the Mediterranean Sea lying? Answer. He was lying beside a pumice of bay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams. Question 70. What was the Mediterranean Sea dreaming? Or what did the Mediterranean Sea see in his dream? Answer. He was dreaming the old palaces and towers quivering in the strong movement of the waves. Question 18. How were the old palaces and towers? Answer. The old palaces and towers were overgrown with blue moss and very beautiful flowers. Question 19. How beautiful were the towers and palaces of old? Answer. They were overgrown with blue moss and beautiful flowers, and so they were so beautiful that man's sense faints picturing them. Question 20. What does the Atlantic Ocean do in fear of the west wind? Answer. The Atlantic Ocean cleaves into chasms its smooth and powerful surface. Question 21. Why do the sea woods and flowers grow? Answer. They grow far below the surface of the ocean on the soft mud of the ocean bed. Question 22. How do the sea woods and flowers react to the voice of the west wind? Answer. They suddenly grow gray with fear and tremble and despoil themselves when they hear the voice of the west wind. Stanza 4. 23. Question. What might the west wind do if the poet were a dead leaf? Answer. The west wind might carry the poet if he were a dead leaf. Question 24. What could the poet do if he were a cloud? Answer. He could fly with the west wind if he were a cloud. Question 25. What could the poet do if he were a wave? Answer. If he were a wave, he could pant beneath the powerful west wind and could share the impulse of the strength of the wind. Question 26. What could the poet do if he were as powerful now as he had been during his boyhood? Answer. He could outstrip the wind in his wanderings over heaven as a comrade of the wind. Question 27. What does the poet think he would do if he were as powerful as his boyhood? Answer. The poet thinks he would never have endeavored to pray to the west wind for help in his sore need. Answer. Question 28. What does the poet pray to the west wind for? Answer. He prays to the west wind for help so that it might lift him as a leaf or as a wave or as a cloud. Question 29. Why does the poet pray to the west wind for help? Answer. He prays to the west wind for help because he falls upon the thorns of life and bleeds. Question 30. What does the poet mean when he says, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed? Answer. The poet means that he is intensely afflicted with the adverse circumstances of life. Question 31. How is the poet like the west wind? Or in what ways are the poet and the west wind similar? Answer. The poet is like the west wind is in that he is tameless, swift and proud as the west wind. Stanza 5. Question 32. What does the poet entreat the west wind to make him? Answer. The poet entreats the west wind to make him his lyre. Question 33. Where will the west wind take a deep autumnal tone from? Answer. It will take a deep autumnal tone from both the poet and the forest. Question 34. What is the poet's last request or prayer to the west wind? Answer. His last prayer is that the west wind be the poet himself as an impetuous spirit. Question 35. What does the poet want the west wind to do for him? Answer. He wants the west wind to drive his thoughts over the world to quicken a new world. Question 36. What will the scattering of his words among mankind be like? Answer. The scattering of his words by the west wind among mankind will be like the scattering of ashes and sparks of fire from a burning hearth. Question 37. What does the poet mean by the trumpet of a prophecy? Answer. He means that the west wind will loudly prophesy his thoughts and ideas among mankind. Question 38. What does the poet mean by the expression, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Answer. He means that his expected regeneration of new world will take place very soon. Thank you, friends, for watching my video.